The bell shouldn't have rung twice before dawn. Ilyra Venn knew that before she knew what had opened on the third shelf. One bell meant death, a clean death, witnessed and recorded. A door opened, a name entered, a family notified, a body washed, a grave prepared, and a candle was permitted to go out. Two bells meant disputed death. It meant something in the dying had resisted the record, or something in the record had resisted the dying. It meant no inheritance could pass, no oath could close, no property could transfer, no succession could proceed, and no respectable official was allowed to call the matter finished just because a body had stopped breathing. In Valeborne, a royal city with enough laws to make mercy illegal by accident, a second bell before dawn was not sound. It was accusation. Ilyra stood alone in the lower register hall with her lamp in one hand and a stack of royal notices in the other, and watched the sealed black ledger open itself. She hadn't touched it. That mattered. In a register hall, touching was testimony. Breaking a seal was testimony. Moving a volume from its shelf was testimony. Even breathing too close to a disputed ink could be testimony if the wrong clerk wrote it down afterwards. Ilyra had been careful. She had entered with a warrant key High Register Soroth Mail had given her 2 nights before. She had logged the hour. She had signed the witness slate. She had opened the only current royal death register, the public succession ledger, and the narrow gray book that listed permissible causes for the death of a prince. She hadn't opened the sealed volume on the third shelf. The sealed volume had opened for her. Its pages turned without wind. Ink gathered on the blank sheet, black as a door with no handle. The first line wrote itself slowly. Oraven Vale. Ilyra stopped breathing. The second line appeared. King of Merrowen. Above her, in the tower behind the palace court, the bell rang once. The third line formed. Dead 400 years. Ilyra took one step back. Her heel struck the leg of a reading stool. The stool scraped across the floor, too loud in the cold hall. The fourth line wrote itself with patient cruelty. Still seated. Every threshold in the hall clicked at once. The bell rang a second time. Ilyra didn't run. That was the first thing she would remember later. When people asked her what courage felt like, it hadn't felt like courage. It felt like training finding her hands before panic could. She set the royal notices down on the nearest table. She placed her lamp beside them. Then she reached for the witness slate and wrote the time with a hand that shook only after the last digit. Pre-dawn watch, second bell before sunrise. Sealed ledger opened without handling. Name entered. Oraven Vale, King of Merrowen. Condition, dead 400 years, still seated. Witness, Ilyra Venn, Junior Death Register, Eastern Court. The ink on the slate dried white. That was good. White ink meant a lawful witness had recorded what she saw before altering the scene. White ink didn't mean she was safe. It only meant that if she disappeared, the hall would know she had seen something first. Sometimes law could protect a person. More often, it protected the shape of the hole where they had been. Ilyra looked back at the ledger. The page didn't move again. Close, she said. The voice sounded too small for the hall. The ledger remained open. Of course it did. Books were not obedient because officials asked nicely. Death wasn't orderly because clerks had built shelves around it. That was one of the first lessons of register training. Though the senior instructors dressed it in gentler language, records are tools, they said. Ilyra had always preferred the plainer version. Records are knives. Hold one wrong and someone bleeds. She pulled the nearest chain bell once. Not hard enough to summon the whole palace, but enough to wake the night clerk in the outer room. A moment later, the side door opened. Darren Pell stuck his head through, hair flattened on one side, collar unbuttoned, ink on his cheek from whatever report had apparently lost its fight with his face. "I told them no more amended coffin inventories until breakfast," he said. "If this is about Prince Caldrin's wax seals, I'm going to walk into the river." Then he saw the ledger. His expression emptied. "Don't come closer," Ilyra said. Darren froze with one foot over the threshold. "What did you do?" "Nothing." "No one opens that ledger by doing nothing. It opened by itself." "That's worse." "Yes." He swallowed and looked toward the tower ceiling, where the last vibration of the second bell still seemed to live inside the stones. "Was that you?" "No." "That's also worse." "Yes." Darren stepped back into the outer room, as if distance could make him uninvolved. Ilyra couldn't blame him. He was 22, maybe 23, young enough to believe fear was a private failing instead of a professional tool. "Get the local witness roll," she said, "and the prince's death file. The whole one." "I gave you the file." "You gave me the acceptable file." Darren hesitated. Ilyra turned her head slowly. His eyes went to the open ledger again. "I'll get the sealed supplement," he said. "Good." He vanished. Ilyra waited until his footsteps faded before she allowed herself one full breath. 400 years. The number didn't belong in a royal death register. It belonged in ruins, temple arguments, archive footnotes, schoolroom timelines. The old divine empire had been gone long enough for kings to build legitimacy from hating it, while still using its roads, its courts, its measurements, its burial laws, and half its miracles under better names. Merrowen called itself a modern kingdom. Its ledger disagreed. Ilyra moved closer to the open page, not close enough to touch it, close enough to read the letters again, and hated how steady they looked. Oraven Vale, King of Merrowen, dead 400 years, still seated. The ink was black, not court black, not funeral black, not lamp black mixed with binding gum. True black, last door black, the color used only when a death was not merely recorded but answered. She had seen ink like that once before. Her brother's name hadn't been written in it. That was the problem. Oraven Venn had died in a winter fever when he was 9 years old and still pretending not to be afraid of the dark. His death had been entered in ordinary gray, the color of common closure, fever, natural, witnessed by household, no dispute. Across town, Lord Merrow's grandfather had refused death for the third time under a sanctioned postponement right. A register had signed the delay. A hospice cart had been redirected. 2 healers had been sent uphill instead of down. No one wrote theft beside Tovin's name. No one wrote that an old man's extra mourning might have cost 3 children their last night. No one could prove it. That's what officials loved about clean paperwork. It made the unprovable look merciful. Ilyra became a register because she hated guesses. She stayed one because she learned that hatred was not enough. Truth needed forms. Witnesses needed procedure. Grief needed somewhere lawful to stand before power told it to sit down. The Black Ledger had just given her truth without procedure. 4 centuries of silence had chosen a junior register with a travel warrant and no protection worth naming. That made it useful. That made it dangerous. Darren returned with 2 folders, one red, one gray, and a face that had gotten damp from the hairline. The sealed supplement was already unsealed, he said. By whom? No name on the break line. Ilyra held out her hand. He gave her the folders without crossing fully into the room. Registrar Venn, he said. That was the first time he had called her by title instead of making her a visiting inconvenience. What? If this is treason, I didn't read it. If this is treason, reading it won't be the part that kills us. He tried to smile. Failed. She opened the red folder first. Prince Caldrin Vale, 26, presumptive heir after the death of his older sister, 2 cousins, and 1 uncle whose hunting accident had required 3 pages of witness correction. Caldrin had died in the North Wing at 23rd hour under physician's care after 2 days of weakness, no fever, no wound, no poison sign, and no final confession. Cause proposed, sudden royal wasting. Ilyra read the last phrase twice. Sudden royal wasting, she said. Darren made a helpless motion with both hands. It's in the permissible book. So is dragon fright in infants. That doesn't make it useful. The palace physician signed it. The palace physician is employed by the palace. So are we. No, Ilyra said. We're housed by the palace while assigned to royal death proceedings. There's a difference. Darren looked like he wanted to believe her and knew better. She opened the gray folder. The sealed supplement was thinner. Too thin. 1 hospice note, 1 servant testimony, 1 physician's amendment, 1 marked unnecessary for succession review in an elegant hand. Ilyra read the hospice note first. Attending mercy witness, Ansel Thrawn, keeper of the last doorhouse, Lower Valeborne. That was unusual. Hospice keepers were rarely invited into royal bedrooms, unless the family had exhausted both physicians and pride. They weren't healers. They did not promise more days. They knew the small rites of clean departure, the word spoken when a person stopped bargaining with the dark. Prince Caldrin had requested one. That mattered. His final recorded words mattered more. He said he could hear bells under the floor. Ilyra read the sentence again. Under the floor. Not in the tower, not in the chapel, under. The royal bell rang above them for a 3rd time. This one was not the disputed bell. This was the public, bright, polished, and deliberate. Funeral announcement. Valeborne was waking. Within the hour, market stalls would be draped in gray. Palace bridges would close. Noble houses would send wreaths large enough to hide indifference. The lower city would pause work just long enough to bow towards a prince most of them had never seen, then return to burying its own dead with less music. Ilyra closed the folders. Has the prince's body been sealed? She asked. Darren shook his head. Lying in state begins at 2nd morning bell. The certification is supposed to be completed before procession. Supposed to be? That's why they sent for you before sunrise. No, Ilyra said, looking at the open black ledger. That's why someone wanted me in this room before sunrise. Darren said nothing. A palace horn sounded above. Ilyra took the witness slate, the red folder, the gray supplement, and 1 sheet of bone-white provisional ruling paper. She left the black ledger open. Darren made a strangled sound. You can't leave it like that. I didn't open it. That's not a legal argument. It is until someone proves otherwise. And if someone closes it while you're gone? Ilyra paused at the threshold. Every door in the hall remained clicked shut, except the one she had opened herself. If the book wants to be closed, she said, it can learn manners and ask. Then she stepped into the outer corridor before fear could talk her into sounding wiser. Valeborne received royal death like a city trained by long practice. By 1st morning bell, Ilyra had locked her witness slate in the lower hall and carried the prince's file up into the waking city. By the time she'd reached the middle terrace, gray cloths hung from windows, archways, lamps, and market awnings. Bakers set out morning loaves stamped with a Vale bird. Flower sellers carried baskets of white river thorn into the palace road. Guild children stood in lines with black ribbons tied around their left wrists. Public clerks nailed copies of the morning schedule to boards already scarred by old notices, old plaques, old taxes, old wars. The bells rang again, once, only once. The public bell didn't know what the lower hall had said before dawn, or it knew it and decided the city deserved a simpler morning. Ilyra moved through the crowd in her gray register coat, the bone clasp at her throat, marking her office cleanly enough that people made space before they knew what they were doing. No one liked death registers. Not truly. People respected them when useful, cursed them when late, bribed them when frightened, and summoned them when inheritance required vocabulary. Mothers touched their children's shoulders as Ilyra passed. Old men looked away. A fishmonger spat over his thumb, then pretended he hadn't. Ilyra didn't take offense. People were allowed to dislike the door. They still needed someone to know where it stood. The funeral procession gathered at the prince's bridge, a white stone span connecting the law courts to the palace ascent. Prince Caldrin's coffin rested on a lower carriage drawn by 4 black horses with silver cloths over their eyes. The coffin was closed. That wasn't unusual for royal dead. It was useful for grief to have a shape and dangerous for politics to have a face. What was unusual was the absence of death marks on the palace doors. Ilyra stopped at the foot of the bridge. Every respectable house in Merrowen painted a narrow blue-gray line across its threshold when someone inside had died. The mark stayed until burial. On disputed deaths, the line was lacquered in black at the center. On forbidden returns, 3 small bone-white dots were added above the lintel, warning visitors that the household contained someone whose status required careful speech. The palace had seen generations of dead heirs. Its doors were spotless. The bone-white metal plated the main gate in long, polished panels that didn't tarnish, chip, or hold paint. No blue-gray line, no black lacquer, no dot, no stain of Prince Caldrin's passing, no admission that death had entered the royal house at all. A court official noticed her looking. He was narrow, clean-shaven, and dressed in mourning black, expensive enough to shine blue. His chain of office marked him as a succession clerk. Registrar Venn? Yes. I'm Master Elric Say, deputy to the palace law steward. We expected your seal before public procession. You expected my review before public procession. A small correction, a necessary one. His mouth tightened. Prince Caldrin's condition had been reviewed by the royal physician. I read the royal physician's note. Then you'll understand the family's wish for prompt closure. I understand many wishes. Register. Where are the palace death marks? The question landed badly. Master Say glanced toward the gates, then back at her. The palace observes royal mourning by banner and bell. That wasn't my question. The palace is not a private house. Death is rarely impressed by architecture. A woman nearby laughed once, sharply, then covered it with a cough. Master Say looked as if he wanted to have the woman arrested, and Ilyra moved into a less public corridor. He chose the corridor. If you'll follow me, he said. No. His face went still. Pardon? I'll view the procession first. That is not necessary. The prince is dead. The airline is unsettled. The lower hall rang disputed before sunrise, and your sealed supplement was opened without notation. Necessary is no longer yours to define. Master Say's eyes flicked toward the people nearest him. Now he was afraid. Good. Not because Ilyra enjoyed it, because fear in officials was often the first proof that a question had found the right door. Before he could answer, the crowd quieted. The palace gate opened. Lady Tamsin Vale emerged behind the coffin carriage, holding a child's hand. The girl was perhaps 11, thin in the way noble children became when grief and training were both mistaken for discipline. Her dark hair had been braided with gray silk. She walked with her chin lifted, her eyes dry, and one small gloved hand gripped her mother's so tightly that the white leather creased between their fingers. Mara Vale, next viable heir if the succession chart could be trusted. Ilyra had seen her name in the red folder. Seeing the child attached to it made the folder feel suddenly obscene. Tamsin looked composed from a distance. Up close, composition had become a weapon she was using against collapse. When the procession paused for the court blessing, Tamsin turned her head. Her eyes found Ilyra's register clasp. Then her face changed. Not hope exactly. Recognition of a tool she had been told still might have an edge. She released Mara's hand long enough to whisper to an attendant. The attendant hurried down the bridge and bowed to Ilyra. Lady Tamsin requests the register attend her after the crossing. Master Stay stepped in. The register is already expected in the law steward's office. The attendant bowed again, lower this time, which somehow made the insult cleaner. Lady Tamsin requests the register attend her after the crossing. Ilyra looked at Master Say. I'll attend Lady Tamsin. She has no authority over certification. No, Ilyra said, but she has proximity to the dead. Master Say's jaw fixed. The procession moved. Prince Caldrin crossed the bridge beneath a single public bell, and all Valeborne bowed. Ilyra bowed too, not to the rank, not to blood, not to the carriage or the silver-blinded horses, to the fact that a man had died and his death was already being managed by people more interested in what it permitted than what it meant. When she straightened, Mara Vale was watching her. The child didn't look away. Lady Tamsin received Ilyra in a side chapel that had been converted into a mourning room. Someone had removed the devotional icons and replaced them with royal portraits, as if the room's old gods had been politely asked to make space for genealogy. Prince Caldrin's childhood portrait stood nearest the door. He had been painted at 8 years old, solemn and golden-haired, one hand resting on the head of a hunting dog. Fresh white flowers crowded the frame so heavily that the boy seemed to be drowning in them. Tamsin stood beside the portrait. Mara sat on a bench under a window, feet not quite touching the floor. Master Say remained outside because Tamsin had closed the door in his face with the calm of a woman who had practiced smaller treasons for years. Register Venn, Tamsin said. My lady, I'm told you haven't certified my cousin's death. Not yet. Good. That was not the answer Ilyra expected. Tamsin saw it and gave a tired smile. You thought I wanted closure. Most families do. Most families are lying or have no idea what closure costs. Mara looked down at her hands. Ilyra waited. Tamsin touched the edge of Caldrin's portrait, not his painted face, the frame. Caldrin was not supposed to die. No one ever is, Ilyra said. That's kind, but it isn't precise. Ilyra respected her a little for that. Tamsin continued. He was healthy, careful, cowardly about illness, which I say with affection. He wouldn't eat unwashed fruit. He wouldn't ride a horse that had thrown someone else. He wore a winter charm until spring made it embarrassing. 3 days ago, he played cards with my daughter and complained that the tea was too sweet. By midnight, he was asking why the bells were under the floor. Ilyra kept her face still. You know that line was in the hospice note. I gave Ansel permission to write it. Why? Because palace physicians write symptoms. Hospice keepers write what the dying are afraid of. Mara spoke for the first time. Can the law protect a child? Tamsin closed her eyes. Mara. I want to know. Ilyra looked at the girl. Children in royal houses were often trained to sound older than they were. Mara sounded exactly 11, which made the question worse. The law can make it harder to harm one, Ilyra said. That isn't what I asked. No. Then can it? Ilyra thought of Tovin, his fevered hand, the gray ink, the hospice cart turning uphill. I don't know, she said, but it can. It starts by refusing to call a wrong death natural. Mara nodded as if that was not comfort, but might be equipment. Tamsin opened her eyes again. There have been others. Heirs? Yes. How many? Tamsin laughed without humor. In this palace, we count them by room. Ilyra glanced toward Caldrin's portrait. Why bring this to me? Because High Register Mail sent you. That was the first true surprise of the morning. Ilyra kept it off her face by force. Tamsin noticed anyway. You don't know why he chose you. I know my assignment. No, you know the version safe enough to write. Ilyra said nothing. Tamsin stepped closer, lowering her voice. Caldrin believed the king should have named a successor before winter. He said Merrowen needed to learn how to imagine a future after Oraven. 3 days later, he began dying. That's not evidence. No, it's why I'm afraid. Fear's not evidence either. It is when everyone in the palace shares it, and no one will say why. Mara stood suddenly. I don't want a bird. Ilyra looked at her. The girl's mouth trembled once, then steadied. In the nursery, they paint birds for the dead children. Caldrin had a swallow because he liked spring. Aunt Sorrel had a nightjar because she died at night. My uncle had a white hawk because he fell hunting. They haven't picked mine yet, but I heard 2 ladies arguing. One said wren because I'm small. One said raven because that would be funny with the king. Tamsin went pale. Mara, who said that? Mara shrugged with awful dignity. People say things near children because they think we're furniture. Ilyra felt something inside her go cold and useful. My lady, she said to Tamsin, I need access to the royal succession death records. You'll have it. No, I need lawful access, not favors. Tamsin understood the difference immediately. What gives you lawful access? A disputed certification. Then dispute it. The palace will resist. The palace resists weather. I need your statement. You'll have it. I may need the child's. Tamsin's expression hardened. No. Mara lifted her chin. Yes. No, Tamsin said again, but softer, which meant the argument had already become grief instead of a command. Ilyra closed the folder under her arm. I won't take testimony from a child unless there's no other way. Mara looked disappointed. That worried Ilyra more than fear would have. A knock came at the chapel door. Master Say opened it without waiting. My lady, forgive the interruption. Register Venn is required below. By whom? Tamsin asked. The king. The room changed. Not visibly. No candle guttered. No floor cracked. No hidden bell rang. But Tamsin's hand went to Mara's shoulder, and Mara stopped looking like a child who wanted answers. She became a royal heir again, which was to say a small person trained to survive rooms that had already killed adults. Ilyra turned to Master Say. King Oraven has summoned me? Yes. When was the summons issued? Moments ago. Before or after I spoke with Lady Tamsin? His face settled into court patience. The summons was issued when His Majesty required your presence. That's not an answer. It's the only one available. Ilyra looked at Tamsin. The woman's expression said, "Now you see the room we live in." Ilyra did. She followed Master Say down through the palace, not up. That was the first wrong thing. Kings received officials in upper chambers, throne rooms, audience halls, sun galleries, libraries with painted ceilings, places designed to remind petitioners that power preferred height. Oraven Vale received a junior death register by sending her beneath the court, down a private stairwell behind the chapel, through a corridor paneled in old cedar and bone-white metal. The air warmed as they descended. Too warm. Funeral buildings were kept cool. Register halls were kept cooler. Death made people practical about rot, ink, and panic. The lower corridor smelled of flowers. Not fresh flowers. Not the river thorn piled around Caldrin's portrait. These were heavier, sweeter, expensive blooms used to cover less elegant truths. Roses, gold myrrh, winter lilies, heated until their scents thickened into something almost physical. Ilyra breathed through her mouth. Master Say stopped before a black door without a handle. Ilyra looked at it. The door was not painted black for disputed death. It was black because the wood had never been any other color. No handle, no latch, no visible hinge. A threshold that admitted people only by decision from the other side. His Majesty receives you alone, Master Say said. No witness? The king is witness enough. Not in death law. You're not here to discuss his death. Ilyra turned her head. For one careless heartbeat, Master Say looked frightened of his own sentence. Then the door opened inward. Warm air rolled out, heavy with flowers. Ilyra stepped through. The room beyond was smaller than she expected. No throne, no council table, no guards visible, though she assumed at least 2 stood behind the scenes. Lamps burned behind red glass. Thick carpets swallowed sound. Bowls of white blossoms covered nearly every surface. At the far side of the room, a figure sat behind a veil of gold-threaded gauze. King Oraven Vale looked like a rumor refusing correction. From a distance, he could have been an old man, preserved by wealth. Thin shoulders, long hands, pale hair combed back from a high brow, a dark robe fastened with a veil sunbird at his throat. Up close, wrongness gathered in details. His skin didn't sag so much as settle, as if flesh had agreed to remain present under protest. His lips were too colorless. His eyes were too awake. The air around him had the stiffness of a room where a candle had gone out, but smoke had not yet decided to rise. He didn't stand. Ilyra did not bow. That was not courage either. It was calculation. If she bowed, she acknowledged a living king before determining whether the law did. Behind the veil, Oraven smiled. Registrar Venn. His voice was soft and dry, but not weak. Your Majesty. Is that your ruling? No. Good. She kept the folder at her side. You summoned me. I did. Before I submitted certification. Yes. Why? To see whether Soren Mael had finally grown desperate enough to send somebody honest. Ilyra said nothing. Oraven leaned back. The veil shifted slightly, turning his face into a piece of gold and shadow. Do you know why old men value honesty, Register? Because they run out of time for useful lies. He laughed once. The sound made the flowers seem more necessary. That was almost kind. It wasn't meant to be. No, I can tell. A pause. Somewhere in the walls, water moved through old pipes, or something that wanted to sound like water. Oraven lifted one thin hand. Have you certified my nephew's death? Not yet. Will you? Yes. As natural? No. There it was, the first open blade. The king's hand stilled. Behind the veil, his eyes remained on her. Careful, he said. I'm trying to be. Most people mean safe when they say careful. I don't. No, Oraven said. You don't. The room held its breath with her. Ilyra set the red folder on the small table between them, then the gray supplement, then the bone-white provisional ruling sheet. Prince Caldrin's death presents unresolved irregularities. No fever, no wound, no confirmed poison, no sufficient wasting history. Final auditory report, inconsistent with tower bells, and hospice witnesses excluded from primary succession review. Oraven watched the papers like one might watch shoulders crossing a bridge. Irregularities don't make a disputed death. No, but the lower hall rang twice before sunrise. Bells can malfunction. So can kingdoms. The veil moved with his breath. For the first time, something like anger touched him. It did not flare. It opened one eye. You are young. I'm old enough to read. That landed. Oraven's gaze sharpened. Ilyra felt the moment become the edge of something she could not step back from. He knew. Not suspected, not feared. Knew. The open ledger was not news to him. Maybe nothing in Valeborne was news to him. Maybe kings who lived 400 years learned to hear every shelf that unlocked beneath their feet. Or maybe the book had been speaking to him longer than anyone admitted. Oraven folded his hands. I wondered, he said, when the book would send somebody brave enough to read the old page. Ilyra's mouth went dry. There were questions a person could ask after that. How did he know? Why is your death written 400 years ago? What are you? How many paid for you? She asked the only one that preserved her footing. Is Prince Caldrin dead? Oraven's expression changed. Not grief, not guilt. Wariness, perhaps, or the memory of grief worn so long it had become posture. Yes, he said. Did you kill him? No. Did your continued rule cause his death? The silence after that was enough to make the room colder, even through the heat. Oraven looked past her toward the black door. They begged me to stay, he said. Ilyra thought of the public myth, the first king chosen because he refused to abandon his people during a plague and invasion. The valley saved by a ruler who would not die. The status, the songs, the old soldiers bowing when his carriage passed. Who did? She asked. The kingdom. That isn't a legal person. No, Oraven said. It's far more dangerous than one. Ilyra picked up the bone-white ruling sheet. Her hand was steady now. Good. Fear had found work. I'm certifying Prince Caldrin Vale's death as disputed, pending full royal succession review, hospice witness examination, and sealed ledger reconciliation. Oraven closed his eyes. Behind the veil, for a heartbeat, he looked almost dead enough for pity. Almost. If you do that, he said, you remain in Valeborne. Yes. You gain lawful access to records many people have died to keep unread. Yes. You place Lady Tamsin and the child under attention they may not survive. Ilyra didn't let herself blink. They're already under it. And you? I'm a register. That's not armor. No, she said. It's a lantern. The words were Soreth Male's. The law's a lantern, Ilyra. It doesn't walk into the dark for you. She wished suddenly, violently, that the old coward were here to explain what he had sent her into. Oraven opened his eyes. A lantern, he said. How quaint. Useful in dark rooms. Dangerous near old flowers. She looked at the bowls around him. What are they hiding? For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he smiled with no pleasure at all. Time. The word moved through the room like the memory of a bell. Ilyra marked the ruling sheet. Cause of death, disputed. Primary condition, unconfirmed royal wasting. Secondary irregularity, final report of subterranean bells. Required action, full review before succession transfer. Register of record, Ilyra Venn. She pressed her seal to the bottom. The bone clasp at her throat warmed. Somewhere far below the palace, something clicked. Not a lock opening, a lock remembering that it had once been made to close. Oraven heard it too. His eyes lifted toward the floor. The first real fear Ilyra saw in him was not fear of death. It was recognition. Something below had heard the seal. You should not have come here, he said softly. You summoned me. No. The flower seemed suddenly too sweet. I answered. Ilyra looked at the black door, at the sealed walls, at the king behind his veil, dead 400 years and still seated. Then, above him, the public funeral bell rang once more for Prince Caldrin. Clean. Official. Wrong. Ilyra gathered the folders and the disputed certification. Your Majesty, she said. This time, the title was neither obedience nor ruling. It was evidence, the name of the problem standing before her. Oraven watched her from behind the gold-threaded veil. Registrar Venn. Yes? When you read the old page again, don't read only the king's name. What else is there? He smiled then, and every flower in the room seemed to fall at once. The names underneath. The black door opened behind her before she touched it. Master Say waited in the corridor with 2 guards, and a face arranged around polite control. Well, he asked. Ilyra held up the sealed sheet. Prince Caldrin's death is disputed. Master Say stared at the mark. You can't do that. I just did. The law steward will contest it. He may submit objections in triplicate by the 4th bell. The council won't permit a succession delay. The council should avoid dying suspiciously near ledgers. One of the guards made a sound that might have been a cough. Master Say's face hardened. You are making enemies quickly, Register. No, Ilyra said, walking past him. I'm identifying them. She climbed back toward the law courts with the certification under her arm and the smell of royal flowers clinging to her coat. By midday, all Valeborne would know Prince Caldrin's death had not been certified natural. By evening, half the palace would be trying to remove her. By dawn, if the Black Ledger was telling the truth, another name might be waiting. Ilyra watched the lower register hall as the 4th bell rang. Darren stood outside the door, pale and rigid. What happened? She asked. He pointed through the threshold. The sealed black ledger still lay open on the table where she had left it. The first page remained unchanged. Oraven Vale, King of Merrowen, dead 400 years, still seated. But below it, where there had been black paper before, the ink had begun to gather again. Not one line this time. Many. Names cramped and small, filling the page beneath the king's death like roots under a stone. Ilyra stepped closer. The first few names were old enough that their spellings belonged in another century. Edrin Vale, Sorrel Vale, Caldrin Vale, Mayrin Vale, Lysa Vale, Oric Vale, children, princes, princesses, cousins, heirs who had almost inherited and somehow never did. At the bottom of the page, the ink paused. Then it wrote one more name, not fully, only the first letter, M. The ink stopped there, patient as a blade just above the skin. Ilyra thought of Mara Vale sitting beneath a chapel window with her feet not quite touching the floor. She reached for the witness slate. Her hand was shaking now. Good, she thought. Let it.